Okay, welcome to this video on the accidental astrologers. My name is Revi. I'm a professional coach, and we're here with Tamra Solvis, who's also a coach, although she does like to go beyond the labels, as you will find out later in this video. One of the reasons we are having this video and conversation today is to explore how both Tamra and myself landed at what I call the doorstep of astrology, quite by accident and not by design. So, without going into it much further, let's just go directly over to Tamra Solves and hear from her about how she got into astrology. Hi, Tamra, how are you doing?
Hi, Viv. How are you? Thank you.
I'm doing well, thanks. So, Tamra, just to give a small, quicker background, which I think maybe I've just preemptively jumped into the conversation, but just to kind of go back 2 steps and mention that I've been studying astrology with you for about a year now. We met back in December 2019, way before the world even had an inkling there was going to be a lockdown and things like that. Although I think some astrologers did have a bit of a clue, but we'll get more into that later. Apart from astrology, there are also other subjects and aspects that you, would I say, dabble in or perhaps practice in terms of numerology, energy practices, and so on. So today we are going to focus a little bit more on the astrology side, although feel free to expand a little bit as and when you feel.
Okay.
So over to you, Tamra.
Okay. Thank you. Again, I'm Tamra Silvas. I call myself a self-awareness coach, and I specialize with individuals and partners and people who are in relationships and families. And I bring awareness to what may be taking place in their life. And I use astrology as a tool. How this came about is I was 38 and I was single and I wanted a change. So I decided to move to Atlanta, Georgia, where a friend was living. I was working, at that time, it was over 15 years in a law firm in Wisconsin, in a few different law firms. So I wanted to expand not only personally, but also in relationships and in my career. So I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Well, when I went there, um, I thought I was going to have this a whole new beginning of relationships and career. And I found myself in the midst of actually some turmoil when it came to relationships. So I was living right in the hub, kind of right outside of Atlanta, but still part of Atlanta. And there were numerous metaphysical centers around me.
Okay.
And a friend of mine went with me, and we decided to explore. And we began with a psychic reading, and then we realized that they were even including some astrology in their psychic reading. So I began to become interested in the subject because I was going through relationship difficulties. Like I said before, I was 38, I was single and never married. So I wanted to see what was, why this was taking place, if they could give me any answers. And then once I had my sessions, and I ended up going a few times to different astrologers because everybody reads in a different way. And I'm sure, Vivek, you've gone to probably several astrologers, and their approach is different. So I went to many, but there was a theme that I noticed that they were all saying the same thing. So I became extremely intrigued. After those sessions, I began to look up the information on my own. And at the time, I was working in this large law firm. But compared to the workload that I had at my previous job, I didn't find myself overly busy. So this was in 2001. And I began to study then on my own. And eventually, when I became a life coach in 2002, I think after a couple of years, I began to introduce it into my coaching and found it to be extremely beneficial. And
Okay.
people people were beginning to resonate with that.
Right.
So that's where it began.
Did you have any formal training with people who taught astrology? You began with some research on your own.
Right.
How did you go on from there?
No, I didn't know anything, and I just began to research it on my own. Then I think a few years later, I did take professional courses at one of the metaphysical centers. I did take beginner's astrology, then advanced astrology,
Okay.
and I implemented it then into the coaching with my friends, with everyone at the law firm, and that's actually how I began to learn.
Wow. Okay. So you kind of learned. So you did the coaching sort of, and you integrated even your astrology into the coaching. Uh, when would you say you, or would you even say today that you actually do astrology separately without coaching, or do you actually feel what you're offering is a completely integrated interaction with your client?
Okay. This is a good question because I do give individual sessions with astrology. But where I'm different, I think, than other astrologies is because I have that coaching and aiding and helping background natural in me. I don't just give information. I try to provide um, aid in the sense that how can you use what I'm giving you? How can you use this in your life to change? I don't just want to say you have your sun here, your moon here, your Mercury here. I want to tell you how it could benefit your life and how you could be expressing it and how you can use it in your life.
Right. Yeah. I definitely remember from our first session when you also give a astrology report. And the report is, as you said, it says your moon is there, your sun is here. And initially you were just like, this doesn't mean anything to me. Whereas, of course, because we were also having the one-on-one, it was really helpful for you to actually explain and translate it in terms of how does it play out in a person's life. Yeah.
A first session is there's a lot of information and people can be overwhelmed because it is a lot of information, but you see the people resonating with what you're saying and you're playing off. It's for me, it's this give and take. You begin to ask questions. I use it as actually to open people up because if you've ever been into a counseling session or psychology or psychiatrist, there's probing that takes place,
Right. Yes.
right? And so when you use the astrology, people feel very vulnerable in the beginning of talking with someone. And if you can say, I already see this in you, then it takes away that vulnerability. And many look at you like, you can see that, that. So it takes away those initial sessions that it normally takes for, I would say, a psychologist or a counselor or anyone to open a person up and to get them to speak.
Right. Yeah, I suppose there's a kind of mystical element where the person feels, oh, okay, they already know about my life, so I don't need to I can lower my barriers much easily because clearly this person sees through them or over them.
Yes, and I think what I try to do is establish a level of trust, and the person has to trust you. So to combine the astrology along with the coaching, I always feel that I have to establish some kind of emotional connection and rapport and trust with the person. So what I am saying to them, they will elaborate on in some way.
Right. That's definitely an interesting approach. I don't think I've actually heard, as I mentioned before, in my coach training, and I've interacted with a lot of coaches. I'm yet to come across someone who's also using astrology as an integrated tool within the coaching session.
Yes, it is. That's where I differentiate myself. I've always been, like Vivek said in the beginning, I don't like to label myself. I don't know why. I have some energy. I do know why, um, but I always wanted to be different. How can I be different? How can I set myself apart from other coaching? Because when I began life coaching, no one knew what it was. It was in 2002, I think, 2002, 2003. And it was new. And so when I was going throughout the years and it was becoming more known, I wanted to separate myself and give myself some type of specialty, something that was different than other coaches.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's I can definitely see the value in it, not just as a client, because I have come to you for coaching sessions and astrology sessions, both independently and integrated. So there's a huge amount of value in that.
No, there is. And I think until you have a session, it's very difficult to even explain to someone because
Yeah,
this, as you know, Vivek, there is this, what is the word? There's skepticism when
of
it comes
course. Right.
to 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 astrology or anything out of the norm. So what I try to do is make it as normal as possible for people, so it's not so woo woo. Because
Yeah, yeah,
I'm actually quite grounded in my approach,
right.
and I try to have a balance. And although I believe in woo woo subjects,
Yeah.
I try as well to stay very balanced.
Yeah.
And when you begin, let me tell you that when you begin and when you start this kind of learning and you get into the metaphysical and holistic world, you're so engaged in it. It becomes you get almost your drug of choice, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. It has its own pull. Yeah, it kind of sucks you in into its own reality.
It does because everything is new. Especially for me, I came from a Catholic background. We didn't even discuss none of my relationships, my friends. I didn't even know their astrology sign. So all of this was so new. So when you begin to speak about this to your regular friends, they think you got involved in some kind of cult or something. Now it's becoming more acceptable and people are becoming more interested in it.
Yeah, perhaps something to do with the age of Aquarius. I'm not sure. Yeah.
So what about you, Vivek? How did you get involved with it?
Well, to be frank, actually, let's kind of go at this in a non-linear fashion. So, to touch upon what you said about people looking at you and wondering what is it that you're up to, um, even though I was born in the UK and my parents were there for 15 years, we came back to India and I've spent most of my life in India, which is where I am at the moment, even though I do live in the UK as well. So in India, there are a lot of concepts that are kind of part of the culture. So therefore, it doesn't really affect your paradigm of the world. So there's no like karma is obviously a concept that comes from Vedic traditions and from India in general. Then you have concepts of destiny, fate, astrology. All these are things that we kind of, it's just part of the milieu, so to speak. So there isn't really much. I mean, if you have your a set of small group of friends that kind of raise one eyebrow, there'll be another set of friends who'll be like, "Oh, tell me more. Can I do my reading with you?" You know. So it isn't that taboo or considered like a tinfoil hat sort of a scenario. You know, we're not that out there.
Did you notice this, Vivek, that when you begin to speak about it, because when I was working at a large law firm, and I did become the guru of the office, you, I always feel you plant a seed. Like the minute you plant that seed,
Hmm.
people may are a little turned off, but even if it's a year or 2 years, at some point they become curious. Do you ever find this? Or
Um,
is it because of your culture that it's not so?
Part of it could be because of the culture, it's possibly more accepted. However, I also have to point out that it has only been about a year, even though by your evaluation, I've made some significant progress in studying astrology. I have noticed, maybe not to the extent that you're describing. So, as I've mentioned, I got into coaching a couple of years ago and decided to get professionally certified because for me, part of the woo-woo of coaching is that a lot of people are suddenly becoming self-proclaimed coaches and things like that. So for me, and this is connecting it to the astrology, maybe being a bit of a Capricorn person, I wanted to have a proper process. So I went and got certified. So once I got certified, I started taking on clients. I was initially focusing on solopreneurs, or to explain it in other terms, an entrepreneur who's just a single owner and a single decision maker without any partners. And from there, I got into the study of neuro-linguistic programming. So I went and got my NLP certification, which is how I came to England again. This was back in May 2019, which is how I ended up connecting with you. But just to continue more to the point of your question, I have a client. This person is someone I've known for a while as a friend. So I experienced the same phenomenon you're discussing when I first declared myself as a coach. It took a little bit of time. People were like, oh, he thinks he's a coach, whatever, and it goes on. But then my friend came around and said, I want to discuss certain business-related matters with you because my family background and history is in an entrepreneurship kind of a family business, which has been going on for about 3 generations. So this friend of mine comes to me for business advice. And what I have found is, just like you said, that with the psychologist, people take time to unwind. As a business coach, I find that most of the time, I find all my clients actually want to do personal coaching, but they begin with the business discussion. So we used to discuss the business, and then slowly it comes down to the person and how they're managing their time and productivity. Now, the next layer for me, thanks to your inputs with astrology, is that the same client called me for an emergency session one of the days because they were having a bit of a stressful situation that they felt a bit overwhelmed with. So we were having a conversation, and I was sitting in front. This was a telephone conversation, although I was sitting in front of the computer. Of course, these days all of us do Zoom calls, but this was still on the verge, right? Where I was still doing some calls via phone and some in face-to-face meetings. So my friend calls me and is telling me about the situation they're going through. And intuitively, for some reason, I felt maybe there's something to do with the energy of the times. So I quickly pulled up the astrology software and looked at my friend's chart. And I said, by the way, and this person had heard that I was studying astrology. I said, would you mind if I just take a quick peek at your chart? And they said, go ahead. And I did. And I could notice that there were at least 6 different planets that were in her house of home, and some that were on the periphery between the houses, the 3rd house for siblings and the 5th house for children. And when I said this to my friend, they were completely gobsmacked. They were like, how did you know? I said, well, I do know you a little bit. However, to be frank, I can just see the I think it's called a stellium. A stellium of planets. Yeah, more than 3. Yeah. So I say I see so many of them, and they're all in your house of home. So, for heaven's sake, don't beat yourself up. There is a lot of energy in the air and the planets that are affecting you in this way. So don't take all that blame on yourself. And to my joy and to my clients' relief, it really, really took a weight off their shoulders. And of course, I went ahead and printed a 3-month transit report for this person. And they spent, I believe, about another 3 hours late into the night reading this report. And the person that spoke to me the next day was completely energized, light, was in complete touch with the resourcefulness that lives within them. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about astrology is how it gives people, it's almost like a forecast of the weather where it's going to happen. It may rain, it may not rain, but you get an advanced understanding of what the weather could be like. And maybe I could carry an umbrella, and I don't need to blame myself for the weather that's going on outside. So,
and there is some relief. There is a relief.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When you say, oh, is this happening? When you tell them what is taking place, they're like, oh, you're kidding. You can see that, but you can immediately see the relief in someone, which I'm sure that this woman had when.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I could hear it in the voice on the phone call, even though we didn't meet and we weren't doing a Zoom call at that time. The next day, it was a different person on the other end of the telephone line. So it was fantastic. Now, just to quickly come back to your original question about the coaching and how I got into astrology. So I was in the middle of fairly large, impactful life changes, which is how I got into coaching because I decided to switch. I decided to shake up my entire career. But on an astrological note, I think that was just Pluto going through my career house, right? So I switched across to coaching. From there, I decided to use NLP as a tool to integrate into my coaching, much the way you're using astrology today. And so I was in London for my NLP training, both at the basic and then the master's level, where I met two coaches from France, one of whom is a friend of yours, right? And the three of us, the three coaches, we said, okay, we had very big ambitious plans back in, I think it was end October 2019, because no one knew what was coming around the corner, right? So we said, okay, let's set up a transcontinental company for coaching where we integrate all our individual specialties as well as the NLP that we've all learned, which is in common. So that's how I started visiting the south of France. And on one of my trips, my friend said, as an advance birthday gift, I'd like to gift you a natal chart reading. And I was like, what the heck is that? And then I was like, sure. Okay, it's astrology, but zodiac astrology. I was like, okay, you know what? I've done Vedic. I had Vedic astrology readings done, not directly for me, but through my family and parents. In India, parents are always checking out their children's horoscopes, right?
Something natural, right?
Yeah, and especially when it's around the time for you to get married according to our Indian traditions and so on. So an interesting thing about that is that I had not directly consulted with astrologers, so I'd heard bits and pieces through my parents' narration. Before my coaching career, I was running a solo business, which was attached as an extension of my large family business. I was doing badly. I was trying everything under the sun. And I was sitting in my chartered accountant's office, who was also a great financial advisor and also quite a wise individual in general. So he said, Viv, you are doing everything you can under the sun. I am just not able to understand why this isn't working for you. Because for this business, you're making all the correct moves, but it's just not working. And at that point, I was so despondent. I would have jumped through like a ring of fire into a well if he'd asked me to, right? And if he said it would work. But he said, my brother, and his brother is a chartered accountant in the same office, just in the next room. He said, my brother has studied at a PhD level Vedic astrology. Would you mind if he takes a look at your chart? And I was like, sure, why not? Let's do this. And within 15 minutes, his brother had come over, taken my birth details, got a chart printout, came and sat next to me. And he reads out a whole bunch of things, which felt like this man had been sitting and living inside of my head for the past 5 years. And I was just gobsmacked. I was like, wow. And it was at a level where I knew this gentleman knew some details of my life, but there was no way he could know intimate details of my life, which even my closest friends and parents didn't know. No one knew these things that he was telling me. So I guess it's also a little bit of the Indian upbringing. I just surrendered to his wisdom, and I kind of could feel that he was a gifted individual, as we'd say, or God realized in some sense. So he had given me a set of I wouldn't call them instructions, indicators about where my life is going, what I could do to turn it around, where the energies were flowing. So fast forward to about 2019 December, when my friend gifted my reading with you. So I kind of came in with an open mind, because I was like, okay, let's see zodiac astrology. I know what my Vedic astrology says. How different are the two going to be? So then I sit with you, and what was fantastic for me about that reading is it was almost like bullet point by bullet point, you matched pretty much what this person was saying. And for me, like an Indian who was sitting in France, having come from the UK, never having met you, who in turn is an American living in France. There's no way you could have had any information about me because even my friend didn't know much about me in that sense. So it was kind of magical in the sense that I could see a kind of underlying science between the two schools, between the Vedic school of astrology and the zodiac school of astrology. So for me, I wouldn't call it woo woo in that sense. I mean, it was outside the comfort zone of my acceptance when I was in my corporate career, but sometimes life experiences kind of help you stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone, and then you discover that the universe is large enough to encompass all these different concepts. So that's kind of how I see it. I see it as a merger of science and a little bit of energies that we're yet to discover more about. But the astrology matched on both ends.
I agree, and the more I understand it, I believe it. I don't think they'll ever consider it to be science. But
Okay.
I don't think they'll ever consider it. I don't know, maybe in years, I don't know how many, but there is a very scientific take. Once you get involved in it and you understand it, you can see the energy behind it where it's almost scientific. And you say the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius actually rules the scientific portion of astrology. So it's interesting that it probably will never be recognized, but there are scientific elements um, with astrology.
I'm not so sure, Tamra. Maybe because of the age of Aquarius, I'm kind of keeping an optimistic mind that, we might expand. Oh, let's say that the science, well, for me, science is more, and this is perhaps what's going a bit off the point, but science is about the scientific method and following through to understand and observe, and through the power of observation and data collection, understanding the layers of the universe. And if we look at even the way astrology works, and of course I know all of this courtesy your teachings, it's like, for example, if we take the planets and how they make conjunctions and trines and squares and all of that, there is an underlying mathematical connection to astrology.
It's all
So
mathematical.
it is. Yeah.
Because it's revolved around degrees. Everything is revolved around degrees and the angles, like you were saying, the conjunctions, the trines, the sextiles, the squares and oppositions, which are um, much more difficult. And there's angles and the elements, everything that is going together, what is fluid, what is not fluid. So yes, it is all revolved around it.
Yeah. I might not have like the papers and citation for this, but I believe even back in the 90s, 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of studies done onto, especially from the Russian side, about the effect of solar flares on the brain and things like that. So kind of understanding how human biology works in space, but also how radiation from space affects human biology. So there's like that scientific bend. And I also find it really curious in a almost amusing manner that every time there is a Mercury retrograde, you can kind of correlate and see the breakdown in communications, especially with our computers going on the fritz, mobiles just kind of crashing for no reason. Um, I think there was just way too many coincidences, shall we say.
Right. And everything is, if you are someone who observes, which I am, I can be in a room and my eyes will be in the full room, not just right here. If you're someone who can observe, which science, that is what they do, you can observe everything and how it's flowing. And when you understand the planets, if you believe that everything is made up of energy, okay, the sun is giving off, the moon is giving off. Why
Absolutely.
not the other planets?
Yeah, yeah.
So if the moon is making you feel a certain way, and just the practical, when we're in certain energy, let's begin with like an Aries, they begin the astrology. What happens during that season? Vivek? March 21st.
There's a lot of initiation, the starting of new activities and things like that. Yeah.
Yes. And um, we begin, that is when it begins, and that is the Aries energy. And as you go, they're all working with each other. And that is why you have the 12 zodiac signs. So each zodiac sign is a representation of energy that we have. So if people would just take the time, but there are a lot of people who are just conditioned, and it can be their either religious views that are holding them back, that are, I know many. I lived in the South in Atlanta. I'm from the North in the US, but I lived in Atlanta for almost 10 years. And with the Christian community, it's told to go against it. So there's a lot of conditioning and fear around the subject. And I know with myself, when you get into this, and I know in India, it's different. You guys have been, I mean, this is where it all began. So it's in some sense,
Yeah.
but I mean, your India has, a lot of the master, the wisdom and the teaching, and it comes from the East. But when you bring it into your everyday life, there is this fear. Even when I got into this metaphysical lifestyle, there is and was some projection of others onto me, my belief system and your values, and to undo all of that conditioning and all the beliefs that are portrayed onto you since you are a child.
Right.
It's difficult because at times you feel you're in the Catholic, not even so much the Catholic, it isn't so much, but in certain cultures or Christian religions, it's against it.
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah, I think fundamentally a lot of things, it just boils down to awareness, which is, of course, one of the big subjects in your life and coaching. It's all about the awareness. I don't know if I mentioned to you that for one of the videos that I had made, I was getting a transcription done, and you can get these services done online. So you go into a platform and ask someone to transcribe it. So I sent a small clip, and a whole bunch of people applied for the transcription job. I'd shortlisted about four of them, and one of them actually said okay, and I was about to go ahead with the project, and they wrote back to me saying, "Oh, I didn't realize this has something to do with energy work. I cannot be part of this. This is against my teaching." So, I mean, each to their own, of course.
you are where what you
Yeah,
how you grew up. It is just what it is. I'm not condemning, because you just have to be
yeah.
open to it at some point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's each person's choice whether they want to look at something in a particular way and continue that way, or whether they'd like to go around it and look at it from the other side. So that brings us back to awareness, of course. And one of the things which I just want to touch upon in the astrological readings with you. In India, so this is again a comparative, right? So in India, astrology is sought after fairly across the board, right? And I mean that both geographically and including across socioeconomic groupings. It doesn't matter. People all go for astrological, I mean, a lot of people go for astrological readings. However, the reason they do so is primarily for predictive results. So they want to know, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Etc. Etc. And one of the things which I observed, and I quite frankly I quite appreciate your take on it, is the fact that when you do an astrology chart reading, it's not meant. You don't go into the predictive side of the science. Would you care to comment on that and how it links to awareness speaks?
Yes. I don't like to go into the predictive aspect of it, because there are so many different angles a person can take. We all have free will. And whenever there is we call it a transit, there is an opportunity and there's a short amount of time in order to act. And it all has to do with the person and where they are. And there are so many aspects, your own free will, so to speak, that can either take you in that direction or it will take you in another direction. I myself, I would rather use it to just bring awareness. And when this awareness is highlighted, that is when opportunities really present themselves and you are able to act. So when I bring something to someone's attention, because this is where astrology is extremely beneficial. Let's say you're going for an interview, and I don't want to tell someone you're not going to get this job. But if there is a difficult aspect taking place in your chart, what I want to do is bring the awareness to let the person know that there's a possibility, yes, of you getting this job, but there is some other aspects going on where it might not be the right timing. So for you to act, there is prominent energy. And then there's other times where I will say, maybe it's not a good time to act, but I don't want to tell someone what to do.
Right.
It's more or less to provide insight, and then you make your own decision
Okay.
on what to do.
Yeah. Sort of like a weather warning, I suppose.
Correct. And because if it shows, if there's more than one or two aspects that are extremely beneficial, let's for instance say Jupiter. Jupiter is all about expansion, opportunities. Okay.
Right.
So if there is Jupiter in a prominent, let's say you're going for a job and it's going through the section of your chart that
Right.
is expanding on your career, then I would say to someone, I would definitely check into this.
Right.
Now, let's see if Saturn is going through an aspect which is a little different. Then there's some learning that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So it all depends on what planet is going through.
Right.
But I don't want to predict. I want to give you the opportunity to make your own decision.
Right. Yeah, that definitely is I appreciate the approach because as you said, and as I've also mentioned to you, there are a lot of astrologers across India. And even from your experiences, I think you were telling me earlier today about how you've met a lot of people who do tarot, psychic, etc. And you've also met both good people who do this well and people who don't do this don't do it as well as the others could. And the distinguishing factor for me is that a lot of people across my experience within India or the astrology scene within India is that they kind of give, how should we phrase this? They kind of put you into a ritualistic and superstitious space in the way they do a reading. Have you observed this across people that you've come across?
Yes. I don't know if it's so much in astrology, but more in psychic readings.
Okay.
Not as much in astrology as I've had mystics. I've had astrologers tell me that, oh, this is terrible energy like that, and it would make me fearful even of, let's say, someone you're interested in. You can give, if someone, which a lot of people come in regard to relationship, I get a lot of people relationships. And if you're looking into someone else's chart and your chart, and there's some energy, if an astrologer or a psychic or intuitive person puts any type of fear into you, I would recommend you not go back to the person, because that is not a reputable stance to take. I don't think. And the reason why I think I can speak from this with experience, because when I was going through a difficult time and when I was learning about this, I went to a psychic and she was also into astrology. But she was actually putting fear in me. And it wasn't until I began to understand myself and this energy, and I understood energy on a deeper level, that I began to notice what she was doing. And anytime I went to someone who would begin, like I remember going to a psychic and she told me I had dark energy around me. Now, mind
Oh,
you, I was working, you've had a session with Wanda. I was doing energy healing for like 5 years. And I was always told that I could connect and I had this light around me. And this woman told me that I had this dark energy and it was going to cost so much money in order for her to remove this energy from
oh, she was offering a service to remove this dark energy.
me. Yeah. So, but by that time, I already was more confident in myself. And I called her BS right there. And
Right.
I actually walked out of the session, um,
Wow.
and told her I wanted my money back, because she was instilling fear.
Right. Yeah.
So this is what I think people need to be careful. If you go to someone and you're getting a reading, if you feel uncomfortable in the sense of fearful, I'm not saying get up and walk out of the session,
Hmm.
but you might want to look for a different astrologer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that because a lot of the people, I mean, as you said in your example, ultimately they are kind of hooking you into a service. And I suppose it's when people say things like, you need to do this or else. And that's when you start to sense, I mean, that's when the fear is being installed. Yeah.
Yes, to me, that is what most are trying to do. They're trying to get you to come back and return and get your money.
Hmm.
For me, it's different in the respect that if you leave in a 90 or 120-minute session and you feel totally relieved, if you don't come back and that session was enough to get you to move forward, that is what satisfies me.
Right.
That from a human and what I do personally, that is what gives me gratification. It,
Right.
I would rather you not come back, to
Yeah.
tell you the truth, and be able to move on. And I will tell you this with, I did have an experience with, I just talked to a friend's brother. She said, would you look at his chart? He was depressed or sad for months. And she said, would you mind speaking to him? And I said, no problem, because I know the family. I spoke to him for about an hour. And I said, don't tell me anything. Let me tell you. Do you feel like this? Do you feel like that? This. She said that one session, she said, I don't know what happened, but he completely changed. But it was just because I was able to almost tell him what he was experiencing and
Right.
to let him know that it was just an energy, it was temporary.
Right. Sort of like the experience with my client who was kind of blaming themselves and was actually in a quite a bad state until they heard this. Yeah.
Yes. And that's where I think as well the astrology is beneficial, because there are these planets that create a tension within us. Some
Right.
people say they're depressed. Some people are saying they're sad because it's wanting us to shift and to move. And I will tell, I told this person, don't even think of the word depressed. Don't go there. Don't use it in your vocabulary. because it's just an energy that's getting you to stop. And when we're so used to moving and being a certain way, then we don't know what it feels like when all of a sudden we feel tired, we feel blah, we don't feel like connecting with feel right away. We are labeled as depressed.
Depressed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And there can be moments, especially if it's a Saturn transit,
Yeah.
where you can feel this way.
Yeah. That reminds me, I think I should take a look at my chart for the early 2000s because that's when I was declared as depressed. So maybe it was a Saturn transition for all I might know.
Yes, and you have Saturn, without getting into your chart, you have some strong aspects of Saturn in your chart.
Yeah.
And then if it's making some kind of hard aspect to one of your angles, then it could have been.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely Saturn is quite a strong teacher in my life, as we've both discussed and seen in my chart. So Tamra, just
We have a discussion about Saturn sometime, a separate.
yeah, we definitely can expand because I think, and in fact, this is one of the things that I've learned from you. And for me, I lean towards that when I do a chart reading, is to first take a look at the chart and look for Saturn immediately, and then see what aspect, both in the natal as well as the transit charts, kind of look at which area of life it's affecting for the person sitting in for the reading.
Right. I always look to Saturn, both in their natal chart and where it's taking place right now.
Yeah.
I won't say 100%. I will say 99.9. I can see right there just by looking at one planet.
Wow, that's fascinating. And since this is just the start of the series, I mean, we can definitely get into this a lot more. Connecting back to the theme of the work that you do about awareness speaks. When this video, of course, is titled The Accidental Astrologers, referring to both of us and how we accidentally came upon astrology. So connecting that to the theme of awareness, would you care to comment on either of us being accidental astrologers?
Yes, as you know, I've never, I don't believe in accidents, but we want to call it accidental because, of course, everything appears like it's accidental. But even in our charts, I know Vivek's chart, I know my own chart, and now that I know, it was, it became awoke inside of me through these metaphysical centers. So there are elements that are inside of you that are already part of you. And why I call it everything awareness speaks is because when you tap into awareness, which is becoming aware, this strikes something within you. And that is whatever is covered up through our pain and all of our experiences, our conditioning. There is something that we resonate with, like, oh, that's interesting. And whenever that feeling is inside of you, that is you tapping into, your awareness is tapping into that consciousness of your interest, whatever is inside of you. So that is why I say it speaks, because I believe awareness is speaking to you all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the beautiful parts about awareness is that when you become aware, and again, I go back to the same example I've used in this conversation about my client. The moment my client was aware of the energies that were acting upon them, it just completely transformed their perspective and gave them the ability to tap into a resourcefulness that was always within, but was just being blocked because they were just taking on too much onto themselves and assigning it as though everything in the universe was only their fault and had nothing to do with the planets around them. But in fact, when they discovered that actually there was a lot of planetary meddling in their lives, they realized, okay, I can take responsibility for what I can take action on. And therefore, from there, I shall move forward. And even, I guess, even as a coach, you might agree that from a coaching standpoint, it gives a client a lot more resourcefulness, because then then they actually see that they can have choices that they can take, as opposed to feeling doomed or helpless or completely wrapped up in their own head.
Right. That is where the awareness takes place. They can acknowledge that this was meant to happen. If I see, I can, you can see someone's history, their dynamic with their friends, their dynamics with their family, their dynamics possibly in relationships. So everything is happening for your highest good, but at the time when you're going through it, you don't see it that way. You see it just happening to you. And so when you become aware and an astrologer tells you, did you experience this? Did you experience that? Do you feel this? What about your relationship with this member of the family? Do you find, and it's it's just actually remarkable the type of information that you can get. And let me quick go for those who are new to astrology. Let me just tell you like how astrology, the imprint of it in your birth chart. So when you take that first breath into this world, the planets are all aligned in the constellations, and they're moving just like the sun is going through the zodiac signs every 30, 31 days, 28 to 31 days. So are the rest of the planets. Or I should say the sun doesn't move, but everything is revolving around it.
Yeah.
But you're born under a zodiac sign, but all of the planets are going through the constellations. And when you take that first breath when you're born, from that point on, as the planets are moving through these constellations, they're making angles to your own energy system. Because when you take that first breath, wherever the planets were at your time of birth become an imprint.
Right.
As they're moving, they're triggering a part of your identity, so to speak. And that is where it's getting you to move and to shift. And that's why each planet has a different meaning, as well as each zodiac sign.
Wow, that's quite an interesting and powerful image you've painted there, Tamra, especially about like the moment of your birth and the first breath that you take, and the imprint that all the constellations at that moment have upon you. It's almost like a snapshot of the energies of the entire universe at that moment acting upon you.
Actually, in astrology, they do call it a snapshot.
Oh, they do. Okay, I didn't know that, even though we've done a couple of sessions. But yeah, that's you always learn something new.
They do. They call it a snapshot, and that's what it is. It's a snapshot, and as you're moving, that's why I believe that our lives are somewhat destined in a certain direction. We do have our own free will. And I think there's like A, B, and C, a direction in whichever way. But in some sense, I feel there is some kind of predetermined destiny. That is my view. But there is an opening for you to go in a different direction if you choose.
Right. And that, of course, choice comes from awareness.
And the choice comes from awareness.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's been great connecting with you, Tamra, especially to start this new series that we've got planned, and hoping to generate a lot more interesting videos like this with you in partnership. If our viewers want to understand and learn more about both astrology and your work, where could they reach out to you from?
They can reach out to me at awareness.speaks.com. That's with 3 S's, awareness and then speaks. Or tamrasolves.com, and that's TAMRASOLVES, like solves.
Solves. Okay.
realize because it's pronounced Solves,
Right.
and I never say Solves. And a friend actually brought it to my attention, and he said, "Do you know that your name kind of goes with what you do?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, "So
Yeah.
yes, yes,
I
I can
yeah.
solve."
Yeah. I remember after our first session when you gave me your card and then I saw the spelling, the thought occurred to me, but I thought it might be a little over the top to mention it in our first meeting. But
Yes, I didn't, and I don't even think of it because I don't pronounce it that way.
that way,
So
yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it was lovely chatting with you, Tamra. We'll definitely get together. Yeah, and we shall do more videos in this series.
yes, and I'm looking
So
forward to it
yeah,
actually.
looking forward to the same. Okay, until next time, take care.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thanks,
Bye
Peter.
bye.
Bye-bye.